Open the door now! We are FBI agents! Come on, get out!
The knock wasn't normal. It was violent, urgent, rehearsed. Two men in FBI jackets barked orders at a quiet family home, threatening to force their way inside. Their voices carried power, confidence, fear. To any other family, it would have worked. But behind that door wasn't panic. There was silence. Cameras rolling. Badges already verified. Because the people they were trying to intimidate were real federal agents, ready to flip the script. It was a calm Saturday afternoon, the kind where time moves slowly and the neighborhood feels untouchable. Sunlight rested gently on manicured lawns, and the Martinez home stood quietly among them. Warm, welcoming, and deceptively ordinary. To the wrong eyes, it looked like the perfect target. Spacious, private, peaceful. That's exactly what the man at the door thought. They arrived with stiff confidence, dressed head to toe in FBI-style jackets, badges clipped where authority should be. Their knock was aggressive, practiced. This wasn't their first time. They believed fear would do the work for them. Fear always did. Inside the house, no one screamed. No one rushed. The Martinez family didn't panic. They listened. They observed. A badge that sat slightly too high. A command that didn't follow protocol. A tone that relied on intimidation, not procedure. These were small mistakes, tiny cracks in a convincing lie. Mistakes criminals never expect to be noticed. Because what the men outside didn't realize was this. The family inside wasn't vulnerable. They were trained to see through deception. Sofia Martinez noticed it before the second knock finished echoing through the house. Not because she was paranoid, but because she was trained. Her eyes went first to the patches. They were close enough to fool civilians, but not close enough to pass scrutiny. The stitching was off. The placement was wrong. Subtle, careless details that real federal agents never overlook. Then her gaze dropped to the gear. The holsters weren't regulation. The radios were clipped incorrectly. And the boots, too clean, too new, like props pulled straight from a costume rack. Most people see uniforms. Sofia saw inconsistencies. She didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. Across the living room, her husband Daniel caught the shift in her posture, the quiet alertness that came from years of operations and near misses. One look passed between them. Not panic, not fear, understanding. In the hallway, their brother Marcus subtly closed the door, his movement calm and unhurried. To an outsider, it would have looked like nothing. To anyone who knew the language of experience, it was everything. Within seconds, three professionals moved as one unit. Daniel activated the security system's internal recording, routing live footage to a secure cloud server. Marcus adjusted the blinds just enough to widen the camera's angle. Sofia checked the timestamp and verified audio pickup. No rush motions. No wasted words. This wasn't a family scrambling under pressure. This was a team executing muscle memory. Outside, the men kept talking, louder now. Their voices rose with rehearsed authority, barking commands meant to overwhelm. They demanded compliance, claimed urgency, threatened forced entry. But something was wrong. They expected fear. They expected movement. They expected chaos. Instead, the house stayed quiet. Sofia leaned closer to the door, listening, not to the words, but to how they were spoken. Real agents didn't shout like this. They didn't rely on volume to establish control. They didn't threaten first. Procedure always came before pressure. She caught another slip, a code word used incorrectly, a jurisdiction reference that didn't match the area. That was enough. She stepped back and whispered, "They're not federal." No one asked how she knew. No one questioned it. Daniel nodded once. Marcus exhaled slowly, grounding himself. Fear had no place here anymore. This was discipline meeting deception. Sofia's thoughts drifted, not to danger, but to responsibility. Years of service had taught her that criminals like this didn't just steal property. They stole trust. They weaponized authority against innocent families, against people who didn't know the difference between real badges and fake ones. Not today. The men outside tried a new tactic. One stepped closer to the door, lowering his voice, pretending calm. "Ma'am, open the door now. This is your final warning." Sophia almost smiled. Real agents never issued final warnings like that. Inside, the family shifted positions, not to attack but to document. Cameras caught faces. Audio logged every word. Timestamps were locked. Escape routes were reviewed, not because they planned to flee, but because preparation was second nature. The house had become a controlled environment. Outside, confidence began to crack. The fake agents exchanged glances. Something fell off. Too quiet. Too still. The energy wasn't right. Victims were supposed to beg, to argue, to cry. These people did none of that. The hunters were starting to feel watched. Daniel quietly messaged a secure contact line, sending footage and location data. No sirens yet. No dramatic response. Just precision. Sophia placed her hand on the door, not to open it, but to steady herself. She thought about how many times she'd stood on the other side of doors like this, announcing herself truthfully, lawfully. She thought about the families who trusted her badge, and she felt something deeper than anger. She felt resolve. The men outside knocked again, weaker this time. Their authority was thinning, leaking out through every small mistake. They didn't know it yet, but the situation had already shifted. They weren't controlling the moment. They were inside it. Inside a trap built not with force, but with experience, patience, and unity. And the Martinez family, once mistaken for easy victims, were no longer reacting. They were waiting. Because when criminals pretend to be the law, the real law doesn't panic. It prepares. The shift happened without warning. One moment, the men outside were bluffing, raising their voices, repeating commands, leaning on the weight of a uniform they hadn't earned. The next, their tone hardened. The performance gave way to frustration. They escalated. "We will force entry," one of them shouted, his voice sharp with impatience. "You are obstructing a federal investigation." Sophia felt the change immediately. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a test, meant to push fear into obedience. Her pulse stayed steady, but every sense sharpened. Years in the field had taught her one truth above all others. When criminals start rushing, they're losing control. Daniel glanced at the monitor. One of the men had stepped out of frame and returned with something long and heavy. Not a firearm, but worse, a battering ram. The threat was no longer theoretical. Seconds stretched painfully, each one pressing against the silence inside the house. Outside, metal scraped against concrete. The fake agents adjusted their grip, positioning themselves like they'd rehearsed this part before. But rehearsals fall apart under real scrutiny. Instead of opening the door, the Martinez family did something powerful. Sophia stepped forward and spoke, clear, calm, and unmistakably professional. "Before you proceed," she called through the door, "identify your agency, field office, and supervising officer. Provide your warrant number and confirm jurisdiction." The words landed like a brick. Outside, the men froze. That wasn't how victims talked. For the first time, they didn't respond immediately. One glanced at the other, eyes narrowing. Their confidence wavered, just for a second, but it was enough. "Ma'am, step away from the door." One snapped, trying to regain control. "You are interfering with a federal operation." Sophia didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. "Then this should be easy," she replied. "Present your credentials to the camera." Silence. Real agents are trained for questions like that. They welcome verification. Proof is their shield. These men, however, had none to give. Instead, they made their biggest mistake. One of them mentioned firearms. "We are armed," he warned. "Open the door now." Inside, Daniel's jaw tightened. Marcus adjusted his stance, ready for whatever came next. This wasn't fear, it was gravity. Everyone understood the line that had just been crossed. Impersonating federal officers was already a serious crime. Threatening armed force took it to another level entirely. Sophia met Daniel's eyes. He nodded once. That was all it took. Daniel made the call. Not a 911 panic call. Not a desperate plea for help. A direct line. Secure. Professional. He transmitted the live feed, the audio, the faces, the threats, and the location, all in one clean packet. No emotion. Just facts. Outside, the fake agents were growing restless. They repositioned the ram. one step back, preparing for impact. They didn't know that the moment the word firearms left their mouth, everything changed. Sirens weren't immediate. There was no dramatic interruption, but something invisible shifted, like pressure building behind a wall. Inside the house, the family didn't move toward the door. They moved into certainty. Sophia spoke once more, her voice steady and unmistakably authoritative. This interaction is being recorded. You are impersonating federal officers. You have been instructed to disengage. The men outside exchanged a look, fear now unmistakable. They had expected compliance. Instead, they triggered scrutiny. They stepped back from the door, uncertainty creeping into their movements. The battering ram lowered slightly. The act was unraveling. Seconds later, distant sirens cut through the air. Faint at first, then undeniable. The criminals stiffened. That single phone call hadn't just asked for help. It had summoned the real law. And now, the people who came to hunt were running out of time. The voice came through the speaker without urgency and without mercy. Calm, clear, absolute. This residence is occupied by active duty DEA, ATF, and FBI agents, the dispatcher said. You are being recorded. Armed personnel are inside. Uniform backup is en route. No shouting, no threats, just truth. For the first time since they arrived, the men at the door said nothing. Silence swallowed the porch. The confidence that had carried them this far drained instantly. One of them tightened his grip on the battering ram, then loosened it. The weight suddenly felt real, dangerous, unforgiving. They looked at each other, panic flickering where authority once lived. Inside the house, no one celebrated. No one moved. This wasn't triumph. It was control. Years of training had taught the Martinez family that the most powerful moment in any operation is the one where reality finally arrives. Outside, the lie began to collapse. One of the fake agents took a half step back, then another. The ram dipped, its metal edge scraping softly against the concrete. That sound, small and accidental, felt louder than any threat they'd made. They hadn't just failed to intimidate a family. They had walked into a house full of professionals. Predators thrive on imbalance, on fear, confusion, and isolation. But now the balance had shifted completely. The roles were reversed. Every word they'd spoken had been logged. Every face captured. Every threat preserved. They were no longer anonymous. They were exposed. Sirens grew closer, no longer distant echoes, but sharp reminders of consequences racing toward them. One of the men reached instinctively for his fake badge, as if it could still protect him. It couldn't. Badges only matter when they're real. Sophia stood just inside the door, listening to the sounds outside, not with anger, but with a quiet sense of finality. She thought about the families who didn't know what she knew, who would have opened the door out of fear, who would have trusted the uniform without question. Today, that wasn't going to happen. The men outside whispered frantically now, arguing in low, broken sentences. Their plan had relied on speed, on intimidation, on victims acting before thinking. But this house had thought, and prepared, and waited. When the truth finally hit them fully, when it settled in that they were facing real federal agents, real charges, and real backup, the last piece of their confidence shattered. The battering ram slipped from trembling hands and hit the ground. Clang, a sound of surrender. In that moment, the men understood something that would stay with them far longer than the consequences that followed. Out of all the houses on that street, out of all the doors they could have knocked on, they had chosen the worst possible one, because the law they tried to impersonate was already inside, calm, armed, and watching. The moment the sirens reached the end of the street, the criminals ran. Not with strategy, not with confidence, with desperation. They abandoned the ram, tore off their fake jackets, and sprinted down the sidewalk, hoping speed could erase what had already been captured. It couldn't. Within minutes, real law enforcement flooded the area, sealing off every exit. Flashing lights painted the quiet neighborhood in red and blue. There was nowhere left to hide. The men were taken into custody without a single door being breached. No innocent family was harmed. No shots were fired. The threat ended where it should have, outside. But that was only the beginning. What started as an attempted home invasion unraveled into something much larger. The footage collected inside the Martinez home exposed a coordinated operation targeting minority neighborhoods, using fear and fake authority to steal, intimidate, and disappear. Search warrants followed. Arrests stacked up. Phones, vehicles, and storage units told the rest of the story. Dozens of families were spared from the same nightmare. An entire criminal network collapsed under the weight of its own lies. The video, calm, precise, undeniable, was later used in federal training programs. Not as entertainment, but as instruction. A reminder that preparation saves lives. That authority must always be verified. That the law is strongest when it is patient. Inside the Martinez home, life slowly returned to normal. No applause, no interviews, just a quiet understanding that training had done its job. Preparation didn't just protect one family that day. It protected an entire community. And it proved something powerful. When criminals try to wear the law like a costume, the real law doesn't panic. It waits, and it wins. This wasn't just a story about fake police. It was a story about knowledge, courage, and refusing to be intimidated. The Martinez family didn't win because they were lucky. They won because they were prepared, and because they trusted their instincts. Remember this. Authority should never be blindly trusted. Real power stands up to questioning. Backhand index pointing right if this story made you think. Like, subscribe, and share. Because the next story might protect someone you love.